Good afternoon, Minister Shanmugam, Prof Chan Heng Chee, everybody. Grateful for this chance to speak on a topic that is close to my heart. Min Chan has talked about race pluralism, and Zuraidah has covered culture and politics, and I would like to cover social pluralism. I'm the Executive Director of AWARE, but on this occasion, I'm speaking on a more personal basis. And on this occasion, my views may not represent AWARE's views. I speak from the vantage point of someone who is both privileged and marginalized, and as someone who has worked in the social justice space for more than 30 years. My privileged position, that's clear from my profile. My marginalization, less so. It is my experience as a gay person in Singapore, covering up my sexuality from my family, colleagues, and until now in the public sphere. When I was younger, there was firstly no acceptable words to speak about this. The term LGBT came into being in the world only in the late 80s and made it into the Singapore lexicon in 2000s. Being a stigmatized minority is difficult, and even more so when this marginalization is hidden and invisible. Being in the closet was no fun at all. It is, in fact, quite painful and lonely. And as a young lawyer, my main aim was to migrate to a more gay-friendly country with lots of nature. That was 30 years ago. Thankfully, I found a women's cause, or perhaps it found me, and I'm still here in Singapore. My work as a gender equality activist has been an important part of my identity. If I could not speak up for myself safely, I could do so for the women who had it a lot worse than me. The women who were victims of family violence, sexual assault, workplace discrimination, harassment. And this is probably the first time that I'm sharing about my own personal situation in a public setting. Why now? The repeal of Section 377A probably has something to do with it. It feels a bit safer these days to talk about these things. Secondly, if we are to take pluralism forward in Singapore, it is important to create brave spaces for the marginalized to share their experiences. It is only when we can speak about this and can hear the human stories of marginalization and alienation that we can begin to start talking more deeply and sensitively about these controversial topics without causing antagonism and polarization. And so I chose to speak about this today, even though it is still a bit scary, because I want to ground this discussion in the lived experiences of the marginalized person and to emphasize why it is so important for Singapore to get this right. We want everyone in Singapore to feel like this is their home, where they can be fully appreciated and accepted for who they are. A place where they can show up fully at work and in the community, and where they do not have to hide or be ashamed of any aspect of themselves. I know of too many LGBT persons and families with children with disability who have left Singapore as they did not feel that they could thrive here. I came close to being a part of that statistic, but I'm glad that I stayed. The recent repeal of Section 377A shows just how Singapore is constantly evolving. Change always feels too slow for an activist, and by definition, we cannot be satisfied with the status quo. But in the 30 years of being an activist, I've seen changes in almost all areas of work that AWARE and I have been involved in. Housing for single parents, protection against workplace harassment, the recent changes being made to the Women's Charter to give stronger protection to non-physical family violence, the White Paper on Women's Development affirming gender equality as a top priority of Singapore, the forthcoming Workplace Fairness Act. All these changes are of critical importance to the lives of single mothers, LGBT persons, and people experiencing abuse, violence, workplace harassment, and discrimination. But these changes did not come about so easily. There are always opposing considerations, opposing groups. And the way that we make change is as important as the change itself. So it has to be made in Singapore. It has been made gradually, but sometimes too gradually. It took a long time to get to the repeal of 377A, but when the decision was made, it was done in a very sensitive way, consulting both sides, and I think the government played a really amazing role as a national mediator. I know from my friends in the LGBT movement about all the many consultations that they had with decision makers. So it's important to promote pluralism as a counterforce to polarization. Pluralism, to me, is fundamentally about embracing diversity and promoting equal participation in society. It's about the acceptance of different views and perspectives. And as an NGO, Aware has strived to not polarize, even as it tries to push for change. So it's important to have the data. Research and advocacy in a reasonable way is very important. We should always assume good faith. We engage, and I've engaged many times with Minister Shanmugam, so it's important to speak to policymakers, to understand their point of view, and for them to also hear your point of view, back door and front door through the media. It's important to understand that we are playing the long game and to keep at it. And dialogue and understanding, to be reasonable and always persistent, is important. I can see that this is not possible for all causes. For the gender cause, it's a softer cause in Singapore. We have more access to policymakers. And this may not always be possible for other groups. And I've seen Singapore also since probably after 2011, the GE election, then Singapore government become a lot more approachable to groups. And I think this is really important as part of the whole sort of pluralistic culture that we want. It is critical that the role that the government plays is that of both mediator as well as to protect the minorities. Because in a plural system, if everyone's voice is counted and embraced, the majority should not be allowed to bully the minority. So it is important that there are some fundamental safety and rights that everyone has. So to that extent, the Workplace Fairness Act is, for me, the most important upcoming initiative by government. My disappointment in this is that it does not appear that it will actually include LGBT persons. And this is disappointing because the law on 377A was changed, and we really, to leave out that group almost seems ironic. It's like the Discrimination Act discriminating against LGBT persons. I hope that some consideration will be given to that. As we go ahead, change will become more complex, not less. Yesterday, I got a text from someone who says, can anyone do anything about this? An institution is refusing to hire a trans woman, who's in transition unless she takes surgery first, but that's pressurizing her to take surgery. She's not fully considered. They are concerned that people will get confused. This person was willing to be male presenting, was willing to use the toilets for persons with disability, and she also said if they wanted to, she would cut her hair, and she's struggling for a job. So all of these issues, it will become more and more complex as we begin to understand gender and sexuality more. If we are going to have a plural society, what about children who have neurodiverse abilities? What do we do to make sure that every single person in Singapore has a place, has basic rights, and accommodation to public goods and services? Thank you. I think I'll end here.